on Nation to Nation, the COVID-19 outbreak at a Manitoba hydro construction site has area First Nations demanding answers. So, what is the federal government doing about it?
We are having a meeting with leadership later on today, and I know our minister has specifically reached out to a number of communities.
But the spread of the virus in the province has many worried. More so because how big could this get?
People are terrified by the potential of the spread of COVID-19.
And in Montreal, a reporter quits his job at a daily newspaper so he can, in part, do more in-depth reporting on Indigenous issues.
You know, you have this huge gap between how the life on the res is described to white people and how it actually happens.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and welcome to Nation to Nation. 4 Cree nations are partners in the Kias Dam project in northern Manitoba, but 24 confirmed COVID cases of workers there has leadership concerned. At a press conference yesterday, those 4 chiefs want work there halted and testing done to keep their band members safe. Also yesterday, Northern Manitoba NDP MP asked the Prime Minister about the situation. He replied that it's being monitored. Joining me now is Nikki Ashton. Ms. Ashton, welcome to Nation.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Now, you asked about the situation involving Kias in question period yesterday. How happy were you with the answer that the Prime Minister gave you that the situation is being closely monitored?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I do appreciate that the Prime Minister acknowledged the severity to a certain extent of the situation at the Kias work camp here in northern Manitoba. What I wasn't happy about was any confirmation that he would intervene. The reality is that there are 4 First Nations who are partners in this very project. They are been extremely clear, including in their press conference yesterday, that Manitoba Hydro is not working with them in good faith to keep their communities safe, some of the communities that are the most vulnerable in this country. The federal government has an obligation to work with First Nations, to support them in general, and specifically at this time of the pandemic. And the fact that the Prime Minister didn't commit to intervening is not okay.
But what can the federal government do to get Manitoba Hydro, which isn't a federal crown corporation, it's a provincial one, to respond more quickly to the concerns of the partner Cree nations?
Well, first of all, as you point out, this is very much provincial jurisdiction. In fact, Manitoba Hydro is a publicly owned corporation. We're talking about 4 First Nations that are partners in an entity that technically belongs to all Manitobans. So it is absolutely unconscionable that we are in a situation that Manitoba Hydro is refusing to work with their First Nations partners, is not taking public health as seriously as they should, and literally are experiencing an outbreak at this work camp that could have been avoided. First Nations have been sounding the alarm about Kias for months now, and Manitoba Hydro ignored them every step of the way. So we do need to see the provincial government step in and show that they take this situation seriously. But we also need the federal government to go beyond I would say the reaction, right? We know FINIB, we know the department is involved in terms of supporting the First Nations around self-isolation arrangements, around the nursing stations and what's happening in the communities. But let's be clear, it's all about containing the outbreak of COVID-19 right now at Kias, including for First Nations members. And so the federal government absolutely has jurisdiction. And right now they're not being proactive. And the situation is very concerning.
You mentioned it, you used the acronym earlier, but we're talking about the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch. I mean, they're the ones, we're not talking about the federal government, we're talking about this branch that would have to deal with local Manitoba health authorities to actually monitor the situation or get anything done. So how can they pressure anybody?
Well, I would say that there has to be political pressure. Obviously there are officials on the ground that, are working on this day in, day out. But we need the Minister of Indigenous Services, even the Prime Minister, to step in and say, wait a second, we don't want to have to deal with an outbreak in a First Nation from the kiosk work camp. So what can we do right now? And what can be done right now, as I pointed out in the question yesterday, is for kiosk to be shut down. In fact, Manitoba Hydro itself recognized the importance of that, and now we're in day 7 of the outbreak, and they have yet to do that. That's not acceptable.
Quickly, Ms. Ashton, how worried in general are people in your riding?
People are terrified by the potential of the spread of COVID-19. You know, we're months into First Nations implementing lockdowns, severe travel restrictions, and really, Manitoba's ability to get through the first wave as well as it did has everything to do with the leadership shown by First Nations. Now we've seen that Manitoba is one of the worst when it comes to the second wave, and that's because of the dynamics we've seen, particularly in Winnipeg and southern Manitoba. We know First Nations and northern communities are deeply connected to Winnipeg, especially for medical services. And so there's a huge effort right now going into keeping communities safe. The last thing we need is for a work camp here in our north to be the cause of outbreaks in First Nations.
Okay, Ms. Ashton, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you.
After the break, we'll speak to Indigenous Services about the kiosk outbreak. Welcome back. To tell us what the federal government is doing on Manitoba First Nations and elsewhere, I'm joined by Valerie Gideon, Associate Deputy Minister for Indigenous Services, and Dr. Evan Adams, Deputy Chief Medical Officer of Indigenous Services. Both of you, welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Now, yesterday, NDP MP Nikki Ashton posed a question to the Prime Minister about kiosk, and the Prime Minister responded and said the situation is being closely monitored. What exactly does that mean?
So in Manitoba, since the beginning of COVID, we have had a very strong trilateral senior collaboration table that includes First Nations representatives, federal representatives, and provincial representatives. They have been monitoring very closely and collaboratively the situation as it emerges and ensuring that community needs are responded to as quickly as possible. They have deployed rapid response teams where they were needed. They have ensured that there continues to be access to essential healthcare services. They have collaborated in ensuring that First Nations have access to the provincial isolation site in Winnipeg, and they have also been working closely with the Canadian Red Cross for surge capacity requirements. So when the Minister talks about the fact that we are continuing to monitor that situation along with other situations in the province, he is referring to that very strong tripartite partnership.
Now, both of you are probably aware that yesterday there was a press conference from the 4 First Nations who are partners with KIAS, with Manitoba Hydro, and they complained bitterly that they're not getting any information about what's happening with the outbreak there. So when you talk about a trilateral table, I mean, has that broken down in this situation?
So we are having a meeting with leadership later on today, and I know our minister has specifically reached out to a number of communities directly to be able to speak to the leadership and ask them what their needs are, what their concerns are. I would say that the table and the collaboration is still very strong. In this situation, we have a private sector partner, which complicates the situation slightly, but we remain confident that the partnership will continue to make progress with respect to reducing the number of active cases across Manitoba First Nations. At the moment, we see that the positivity rate in First Nations communities is very similar, comparable to the positivity rate for other Manitobans, for those that are living on reserve, and we want to continue to improve that situation. We've also seen a reduction in terms of the number of new cases, which is also encouraging.
Now, again, at that press conference, the chiefs were saying that not only are they worried about things, but their community members are. I mean, what can you tell community members who are maybe worried about where the second wave and where this pandemic is going?
I will definitely turn to Dr. Adams on his public health advice, but I would say that understanding the seriousness of COVID-19 can assist in ensuring that people will be aligned with the public health measures and advice that we have been providing, and that has been heavily communicated across the province. Even during the first wave and over the past several months, Dr. Marcia Anderson, Grand Chief Dumas, and others held Facebook Live events. I think that they have been trying to underline that this is a very serious situation and needs to be taken seriously. We cannot control completely individual behaviors, the behaviors of families and communities, but we are relying on individuals to really listen to that public health advice and take the measures that are necessary to limit the spread of COVID-19 in their communities. And with that, I'll turn to Dr. Adams.
Certainly some asks for regular communication. They want to know how many have been tested and how many are testing positive, how many are doing well and are doing fairly well and staying at home. What are the latest orders? Many people have shelter in place orders so that they can stay put, get well, and not be sharing infection. Some people want to know about how they're supported. So, those communication asks are pretty common. But with the numbers coming down, we always rely on people's goodwill to stay home and to look out for each other, social distancing, wear a mask if you need to be near each other at all. And please stay in touch and ask for help if situations are kind of getting beyond what you can handle.
That Chief, I'm calling about Chief Leroy Constant. I mean, what are you telling him, I guess, to ramp down his fears about what's going on at Kiosk?
Dr. Adams, I don't know if you have any specific response to that.
Sure. Well, I think I'm trying to think how to say this. It's important to have an appropriate response, as in to be level-headed and to keep at the actions that are required, as opposed to having a reaction where people are frightened, where they're mistrustful of what's occurring. There are a lot of people who are rushing to respond. We have some experience in this. This is slightly unusual in that it's a lot of people in a short period of time, but we are watching over. And, some reminders that there are people who are ready to help you if you're sheltering in place. Testing is ramping up. Medical personnel are standing by. 95% of people will have cold-like symptoms, can stay home, will get better, and if they stay in place, then they won't be sharing infection. So there's lots to be hopeful for, and there's lots of help. So I would keep my eye on those, not just on, a fearfulness. I would say be prepared instead of scared.
I of course spoke to both of you 3 weeks ago about what was happening, and it seems like things have picked up even faster since then. So what's happening? Why are we at this point, and what can be done to, I guess, bend the curve again?
Where chiefs are expressing concern about possible exposures that their community members have seen from external events or gatherings or even workplaces, listening to those leaders and working with them to ensure that the necessary precautions are taken. We are continuing to fly in through private charter services. The majority of healthcare providers that are coming into remote and isolated communities, we've flown over 2,000 people to date. We have not modified any of our special measures through the non-insured health benefits program, for example, for people that do have to travel out to access medical services. And we're continuing to ramp up our surge capacity with respect to nurses, paramedic capacity, emergency medical technicians, and others. So, I think that we have to continue to do what we were doing in the first wave, addressing situations very rapidly. And you can see that there's been some success, including in some Manitoba First Nations communities.
Okay, I want to thank both of you again for taking some time to speak to me.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
After the break, we speak to an investigative journalist who uses crowdfunding to get the job done. Welcome back. Our next guest is a journalist who recently quit his job at the Montreal Gazette. It certainly turned some heads in the business, but of course he had his eyes set on something bigger. He's now doing in-depth investigative journalism that is completely crowdfunded by his readers. Christopher Curtis joins us now from Montreal. Welcome to Nation, Mr. Curtis, or should I call you the Rover?
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, man.
Why the Rover?
I think the idea is that, I'm moving around a lot and kind of like that children's game, Red Rover, and I happen to be fond of dogs, so, it was a way to work it into the logo as well.
So I guess speaking of roving, you walked away from a journalism job when most are desperately trying to keep them. Why did you do that?
That's a good question that, my accountant wanted to know as well. Essentially, I loved what I was doing at the Gazette, and they nurtured me and they helped me learn the craft, and it was really at the Gazette that I fell in love with covering Indigenous issues. But as we continue, and as most, as we all know, most news is not exactly a growth industry right now. So as we lose resources and have to lay off reporters, there are fewer and fewer of us to just basically catch up with the news of the day. And what I've kind of done my entire career is try and build relationships and work on those longer term stories, which aren't always. It's not something you can flip in a day a lot of the time. And there are a lot of parts of Quebec, and specifically of Indigenous politics within Quebec's borders, that don't get covered because they're just too far, and it takes too much time to go there and do that reporting and build those relationships. And that's what I most want to do.
What was your first story? I guess your first crowd-funded story.
The first one was it was about there's an illegal dump on Mohawk territory in Ganazadage where you're seeing construction companies from across the north shore of Montreal, the south shore, and as far as Ottawa, coming to Mohawk territory to get rid of their industrial refuse. And in fact, there was so much waste that this site had 15 times the amount of industrial waste that it was meant to hold. So on a concrete level, that means that Mohawk families that live near the dump are getting nosebleeds, headaches. Sometimes the pile of waste is so big that it spontaneously catches fire. So I partnered with a journalist at the Mohawk-owned Eastern Door newspaper. Her name is Virginie Anne, and we inspected why Mohawks in this territory can't get justice. They're appealing to their band council, they're appealing to the province, they're appealing to Canada, and no one seems to be able to hold these two brothers who own this dump. No, they don't seem to be able to hold them accountable.
From the story you just described to me, and you mentioned earlier that you were interested in Indigenous issues, even at the Montreal Gazette, is there something in particular that has drawn you to them?
Well, I grew up, I'm at my dad's right now, actually, and he grew up, and our family's from right next to Ganazadage, so I went to high school with a lot of Mohawk kids, and it was weird, after school, they would go back to the territory, we would go to our cities and stuff, and we never really interacted that much, and it was like we lived in these two different worlds. And then when I started my job or started working as a freelance reporter, one of my first gigs was at the Eastern Door, and I just fell in love with the community. And you have this huge gap between how the life on the res is described to white people and how it actually happens. So, all we ever hear is bad news, and all we ever hear is that things are terrible and there's a hopelessness. And if you go to a place like Ganawage or Ganazadage or Akwesasne, you realize that there's so much hope, and there's these are places where people rally together in times of crisis, and where they're just fighting to be able to continue speaking the Ganyageha language, to continue to be able to kind of just live and exist in a society that seems bent on stopping their existence or modifying their existence in a way that suits us better. So, that's a very long answer, but they're really intense issues, and I care about them a great deal.
I guess speaking about issues, what's the next issue or story that you're doing, and where is it going to take you?
I'm going to head back to Val d'Or next week, where I'm continuing an investigation into police abuse or allegations of police abuse against Indigenous women up there, and just essentially trying to flesh out a story about why people in these Anishinaabe communities are sort of pushed from their homes, and then they get to this city where if you're homeless, odds are you're Anishinaabe. If you're living in poverty, odds are you're Anishinaabe. Some landlords won't even rent to Anishinaabe people. So the story is just to go there and examine why that is, and what's working and what isn't, and how we can do a better job reporting on these issues. And there are good news stories coming out of there. Anishinaabe communities near Val d'Or, which is the city I'll be going to, are retaking control of their youth protection system. There's a lot of kids enrolled in college and university, and we have to report on those stories as well. And we have to let other settlers like myself and that know that things aren't all negative.
And as I mentioned earlier, your job is basically crowdfunded. So what kind of support have you been getting? Is it enough to, I suppose, keep a roof over your head?
Well, one of your employees, one of your colleagues, Kenneth Jackson, I think bought 10 subscriptions off me, and the condition is that I have to jump in the St. Lawrence River, which it's cold today, but I'm going to do that today. So thank you, Kenneth. But no, the reaction's been really good. We're almost at 1,000 paid subscribers. If you subscribe, you get for $12 a month, you get a weekly newsletter, which is kind of like a column that I write, and you're funding at least one piece of journalism a week. So far the journalism's been really fulfilling and really good. We're getting a lot of good response from the communities that we're reporting on. We have a lot of good momentum. We just released a story today about the City of Montreal's reconciliation strategy and how we can make the city safer and more welcoming to Inuit and other Indigenous people. And so the response has been great, and I really feel connected to the people who helped fund this, except Kenneth, because he's making me jump in a river. But I love it. It's been a great response.
And finally, Mr. Curtis, are you happy you left the Gazette?
Yeah, I mean, I love my colleagues at the Gazette. They still do amazing work. But I think it was time after about a decade there to start really digging in deep and re-examining how we do journalism. I talk to a lot of universities and students, and I tell them to take risks and I tell them to try things out. But I think for a long time I was trying hard, but it really also felt like I was just collecting a paycheck and just sort of going to press conferences. Whereas now this really feels like an adventure.
It's been a pleasure to speak to you, Mr. Curtis. Thank you for joining me and talking to me.
Well, have a great day, and thanks to your viewers. And I think APTN is a great source of, one of the greatest sources of journalism in this country. And all joking aside, I think Kenneth Jackson is my journalism hero. So
that's all the time we have. Next week, Senator Murray Sinclair will be joining us. But before we go, here's some video of Christopher Curtis honoring his bet and indeed jumping into the St. Lawrence River. I'm Todd Lamoran. Thanks for watching.